Hello, everyone. Today I am with Susan Schwartz PhD, and Susan is a Jungian analyst, educated in Zurich, and a licensed clinical psychologist. Her latest book is a Jungian exploration of the puella archetype. So welcome back, Susan, because we spoke before, not so long ago.
Yes, we did. Thank you.
And today it's called On the Couch with Susan Schwartz. So what we had talked about taking up is the topic of diagnosis within psychology. Right. And I just want to make a quick disclosure before we start, Susan, and then hand it over to you, because I think what's interesting is, obviously you're a clinical psychologist, and I'm someone who perhaps goes a little towards James Hillman when he said, "Is psychology ill?" I have a little strain in me that empathizes with Hillman when he says all that. But so I think, I'm looking forward to hearing what you've got to say about all of this. And I would just like to start by saying a couple of things. Like, I remember in Jung him saying that, well, there's the classic, the one that everyone repeats, when he said that he was more interested in the numinous than in neurosis. And I remember him saying once that it was something along the lines that many of his clients don't have a clinical definable condition, but they actually need to fulfill their creative potentials more.
Exactly.
And also he said somewhere along the line that he gave up. What I thought was cool about Jung when I read Memory Stream Reflection was that he actually listened to the so-called crazy people in the Bergholzi clinic, while everyone seemed to be running around diagnosing them. He was more listening and saying, "Hey, that what that person just said connects to a myth," or something like that. He was kind of hooked in that way. And then with Hillman, who came along later, as he is often a bit of a firebrand, as we know, in his ideas, which I always appreciate, I suppose. But his thing was, well, is psychology ill? Because psychology was actually named after psyche, and psyche was beautiful, and the psyche is beautiful, and that, perhaps that's something that we need to understand more. Anyway, I've given my two bops worth, so I want to hand it over to you. Can we start from there?
Right. Well, I'm going to add a bit to what you said. I think the beauty of analytical work is finding the symbolism and the meaning in what someone is saying. So that's what Jung did at the Bergholzi. He realized that there was meaning and symbolism, meaningful symbolism in what people were saying. There also is, quite a few people have written about this. If you can't symbolize, how can you really understand psyche and the beauty of psyche? I'm going to agree with you a bit in relation to what Hillman said, a bit, because psychology itself, classically, the way it is being taught and utilized in treatment now is very superficial, very brief-oriented, depth. The beauty of psyche, the search for meaning and purpose has all been reduced to what is the diagnosis? Where is the pathology? How the psychologist is the one who tells the person what to do, rather than it being a mutual, we will find it together. There's something in the analytic process, which is much more of a together mutual exploration, as Jung showed in the pictures of the psychology of the transference. It's a mutual exploration in depth. psychology, again, as it's practiced, at least in the United States, has become very narrow, superficial, dictatorial, as we were speaking about earlier. And I think it's lost psyche. It lost the soul. So I think if we stay aware of what we have to offer in a depth way, the world needs it. We're struggling a lot. And maybe it's because meaning and purpose have somehow gotten diminished. The taking over of horror and fear. Most people are very worried, at least in my practice, worried about the world, worried about the shakiness. And there is where I think the depth is so important, that we find our own meaning and use it in the world, both.
So what do you find in your practice?
I find that people are pretty nervous, and not about their own personal life, but also about the world's life. And I think that that is an important piece to bring into the analytical work. As we were speaking a bit earlier before we started recording, this whole aspect of, so what is happening in our political and our outer world that is affecting ourselves, and what can we do, if we can do anything, to affect the world? I think it's but you can't do that if you're just following the rule. If you don't have psyche and you don't have the real meaning of what the psychological exploration is.
So there's a few things I'd pick up there. Psychological exploration, depth. Can you just kind of expand a little on what you mean by those?
Yes. To me, the beauty, again, of analytical work is that it's not just, let's figure out the answer to the symptom, which is the reason for coming into any kind of psychological work. Let's find the meaning behind it. Why has it happened to you at this point in your life? What is there to learn? How do you piece the past to the present to develop a future? And I think that that line of one's personal life and the collective life and the transgenerational influences and our responsibility to pass on consciousness lost in the superficial psychological work. I have read so many things. It's very saddening in a way, sorrowful, that psychology has become a version of no soul, as if the mind has no soul and no way to be able to make sense out of maybe what we can't make sense of. But really, if you can't symbolize, life is dry. It's kind of boring. Your dreams don't count. How many psychologists deal with dreams? They don't. They don't even know.
I think sometimes what I notice, like I could think of two areas. Like last time we were talking about the puella,
Yes.
And I can remember a time, and I think maybe, again, this gets back to Hillman a little bit, or maybe how I've been influenced by the way he thinks about this, but the puer, the puella, that there was maybe a time when that was seen as like a bit like having a neurosis, if you had puer tendencies or puer, well, for the male, he had a mother complex. I'm not quite sure what the puella, how that was said, but it seems like the dynamic more is. Are you still there, Susan? Because my screen has frozen.
No, did say this on a little bit ago.
Hang on. The screen has frozen up on us.
Really? Oh my gosh. Are we back?
It's back.
Good. Okay. Good.
Oh, yeah. And sorry. So let me just finish that. That, I would see it maybe that now there's maybe a thought that we shouldn't throw out those puer or puella tendencies, but it's the interplay or the dialogue between, you know, the puer and the puella and the senex and the old, and how we can kind of manage those within our lives. So the diagnosis seems to be a little bit, well, that seems to maybe have been a bit of a wrong diagnosis in a way.
I think so. And also, when you said about diagnosis, I don't think Jung, in all the collected works, diagnoses. He doesn't really diagnose. He does speak about neurosis and psychosis, but I think it was a bit differently used when he was writing. And I like the fact that he doesn't put people in pigeonholes. And I actually don't. I mean, when people would ask, what is my diagnosis? I always say, what do you think? Because that's not what's most important. What's most important is how you're in relation to yourself inside, and what is blocking and what is opening, and how do you find your way? How do you find your way through your life? And when you said about the puer, puella, the point is the dynamism that's happening between all the personality aspects. How free are they to interact, hold each other, support, learn, not be destructive, but be constructive? However they are composed, and I think they change throughout life. So I think to be stuck in a diagnosis can be very limiting for people. And here's where I would agree with what you're saying about Hillman. We're lost if that's all we're going by, is a diagnosis, and then we can follow in this diagnosis, do this, in this, do that. You know, it's like reading a recipe without putting in your own ingredients. And I think each situation, each person needs their own ingredients. To me, that also is the spirit of not just the times, but of the depths of the person and the culture, both. I mean, we carry that. We carry our backgrounds. We need to know it, not negate it. It's part of what gives life. So if you only have a diagnosis, you're not going to, I think one forgets then about the transgenerational richness, issues, problems as challenges to work out, not pathology to erase.
So it's kind of like in my language, we should stay close to the pathology or the complexes and stuff like that, but it's not, it hasn't necessarily got that negative slant on it. And that seems to be what you're saying. You're saying,
yeah. Yes, I think that people get too caught in the classical medical model of what's the problem? How will I solve it with a pill? Not with psyche, not with knowledge, not with development of one's entire being, including the body, but we'll do an easy, give you a pill. It's a very flat way to live. And I think this is what Hillman was rebelling against as well. If we've had all these years of psychology, where are we? And if we are reduced, then what's happened?
But where do you disagree with him? Well, you
No,
know,
I do agree with him. No, I was saying I do agree.
Yes, I know that, but do you disagree with him do you?
From what I understand, so I didn't know Hillman beyond the things that I've read.
Yeah.
From what I understand, I don't know how easy he would be to be an analysis with. I'm not sure. Only because it seems sometimes, I could be misinterpreting, that the image is perhaps more important than the person who's carrying the image, or why are they carrying the image? There's a piece in there that seemed a little, to me, far away from the person. I wanted it a little closer, but that's just me. That's just
Well,
me.
it's not just you, because he actually gave up being an analyst and he struggled with it. So he maybe, it's possible he saw a little bit of that in himself. And I think someone said one day that, you know, sometimes when someone has a certain kind of genius, they can have some blind spots in another area. You know, it can be like that, can't it?
Yes, it can. Well, you mentioned complexes a bit earlier. We all have them. They make us blind, and they make our eyes open. So they do both. But I think you're right. A genius is pretty one-sided in a certain sense. That's their genius. They develop, boom, that way. And we all have that. We all have some genius, I think, and we all develop one aspect of ourselves more than others, but we want to be able to play with all the others, have them somewhat accessible. And there's where I think, again, the ability to symbolize, find meaning in life is incredibly important. And that's the analytical work. That is not what psychology does anymore, at least in the United States. Unless you go in depth, you're not going to find the symbols and the meaning. It takes depth. It doesn't happen in 6 sessions.
Depth doesn't happen overnight.
I don't think so. And it really doesn't happen if your work is to eradicate the pathology, not to understand it, not to use it. Even when you mention puer, I mean, so what does that mean? Doesn't that mean that there's energy and life and creative throughout life? I think people need to be able to be,
It's kind of like the youthful freshness of life itself, that there's something wonderful about that.
totally.
To understand, to use, to be with.
Exactly. But if you're in a classical, well, in a, I don't know if it's classical, but if you're in an average psychology world, that's not going to happen. You're not going to be able to play with it, because the issue is you have a problem, solve the problem, now you go. So everything is orchestrated by the psychologist. You know, I could be simplifying it too much, but in its awful aspects, I'll say, it's too simplified. I'm not here to tell people what to do. That's like ridiculous. Where's the life in that? And I think the analytic process is to ignite life, or to figure out about it, or figure where you are in it and make sense out of it. If you carry one aspect through life, so we could use the puer or puella, one aspect all the way through, and that's the only thing you do, well, it doesn't mean you don't get things done, but you want to be able to have that flexibility and life energy to use other aspects of yourself as well.
I think it's kind of like, the way I would see it is in the interplay, like, I don't know, what did Jung say? One-sidedness is neurosis. I think he said that somewhere along the line. It's kind of like, it's in the interplay between different energies, or in Hillman's language, he might say different gods and goddesses, in the pantheon of different styles and tastes, or something like that. That to just go with one energy is somehow a mistake, that you want the spectrum.
I think it's limiting to go with one energy. You can see it actually in Jungian work now, where people are, it's not just Jung that people would read, of course, but it's many other people as well, other psychoanalysts, other philosophers, to bring in a like an interdisciplinary approach. Our world is a far more emphasizing plurality more than this is the only way to define life. I think it's exciting. I think it's more difficult to have that openness. And I think, as you said earlier, to allow for all sides. It really takes something to listen when you don't agree.
It does.
Mm-hmm.
And you get the feeling that maybe, I don't know, I'm going into the culture for a second here, that at this particular moment, the different sides want to eliminate each other rather than actually for there to be a dialogue between the different sides.
I think that's right. I also wonder if it isn't driven by fear. Fear is incredibly powerful and it can paralyze us. And as a defense, we want to eliminate what we are afraid of. And I think there's a lot of fear in the world. I don't know at this very moment who is bombing who, but somebody's bombing somebody. And I also think there's another piece, which is that there are so many people in the world, whether we live there or not, I think we're somehow affected by the amount of refugees, people on the move, kids lost, parents gone, families destroyed, the land is a mess. You can't not pay attention to that because, of course, it comes in people's dreams, in their active imaginations, in their world. We have to be, if we are vibrant, we have to be aware of us and also what's happening outside of us.
Now, can we get on to narcissism for a second?
Can certainly get onto narcissism. Absolutely.
So
yes,
what's your take on it from your experience as a therapist, as a psychotherapist?
Right. Well, it's interesting you say that because my next book is Narcissism and Love, the tragedy of isolation and intimacy. So that comes out next year from Ruler. So yes, I'm very interested in narcissism. The take that I have on it more is its singularity and elimination of the other. So when you read The Myth by Ovid, I'll bet you've read it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous myth, but it's very sad. Everyone loses their body. There is a level of the unconscious that stays unconscious. It's really rather rough if you look at it. It's not beautiful at all. And so the struggle.
But doesn't he? I'm sorry, I think I read this in Thomas More's book, Care of the Soul. But there was, perhaps narcissist, looking in the pool we begin or whatever, but narcissist becomes a flower. Isn't that a kind of a motive of a transformational motive, perhaps, of the opening or the budding of personality or whatever we want to call it?
It is, there is something that you reminded me of, but it a going back to the plant flower world and then maybe to emerge into the person world in a different way. It hasn't happened yet, though. So it's like a regression and a demise of what was, and then what will it flower into is the question. The interesting thing about the narcissus flower, very transitory. It doesn't hold its bloom very long, quite like Narcissus, actually, and also like Echo. Echo doesn't hold her bloom very long either. She loses her body completely. I think it's, or I'm going to ask you as well, is it a myth? Very, very appropriate to our time. Is it one that really reflects the spirit of the times?
I think it may. Yeah.
I do. I do too. I
I
do
mean, the
think,
way I would see it is that rather than, like, you know, I've already said to you, and I think that was before we started, that sometimes it seems to me if we go out into the streets or onto social media, that it's become a little bit blasé, that if someone has a different political opinion from me, I could say, well, they're a narcissist or whatever. So it's become very loose, you know.
oh yeah, yes.
Um, Someone you don't like is a narcissist, basically, or whatever. But I would say what's more, for myself, what would be maybe more valuable is to say, well, how is narcissism in operation rather than the labels and all of that? Is when does it take over? Like, for example, someone likened me the other day to an older, someone they know who happens to be quite old, you know. And I could feel myself becoming like hard and brittle, and you know, perhaps that's narcissism, where you become hard and brittle to that kind of connection or association. And maybe I'm a little bit sensitive about at that age, you know, uh,
Yeah.
of of all of that. And I was thinking, wow, it's such a powerful thing how it can overtake you, or how it can come into your life, a certain kind of narcissism, a brittleness of the ego or whatever.
Yes, you know, it's interesting when you said about the brittleness. I would agree with you. I think that's what I meant about the singularity, that it's really, in a way, a defense against intimacy and closeness. It knows isolation. It doesn't necessarily know connection. And people are too free with the word narcissist. Yes, everyone who's impossible is a narcissist, which is very, in and of itself, very limiting. It shows how much we really know. The narcissists themselves are very tender underneath, right? I mean, Narcissus was what, a teenager. So there's a tenderness, a vulnerability that is hidden and needs to learn or could learn how to be more open. There's the challenge. I think that if it's only, again, in that pathological realm, it's never going to be understood.
So what you know, when we talk about the other, or you know, I'm presuming from what you're saying there is that in a way there's this opening to the other, you know, and that can sometimes be daunting too, isn't it? Because it isn't just other people, but the other in terms of, you know, when Jung talked about the mysterium tremendum, and he talked about the fear perhaps associated with a big experience of not only is there the tremendous, the good side of it, there's the kind of the trembling side of it. And I
Well, that,
imagine love is a little bit like that.
yes, yes, that tremendum is the largeness of whatever is the experience. Some experiences are just like that, but I think we're experiencing other than what we have known. It's not regular life other.
You're
So
talking
that's,
about around us at the moment.
yes, so that's one other. Other others are pieces of the personality inside, as well as people who are different, others. Anybody outside of us is another. How open are we to them? We live in a world that has become very divided. We don't want those others. And, you know, each country, each tribe, each organization, I don't want those others. Why? Because they threaten the status quo. But that's the only way we grow. So could we say that narcissism is also, for many people, an opening into growth if they understand it and how to use it? If you're just, what should I say, using it defensively, then you're not active inside of yourself. I think it carries a promise and a hope. I just think a lot of people don't recognize that there
Transformative.
could, yeah.
I remember, I can think of the way Thomas More puts it, and sometimes I like the way he puts things in the terms of, I think he said something along the lines of, people come to him as a therapist and they want to get rid of something. They want to eradicate something. They want to get rid of some problem or fix it or whatever. And the whole thing is that, I think in his language, it's like honoring symptoms as a voice of the soul. Like, you know, what is that symptom wanting to say?
Exactly, which is where, as we said earlier, the way psychology itself is worked, it doesn't deal with the soul. So if you look at the narcissism as an opening to the soul, there's far more potential there than there is, oh, that person's a narcissist, impossible, forget it, you can't ever get through. That isn't true. You can get through. But you need that, also that approach of, this is a place of the soul, and maybe the soul is trapped. And how can it be released?
So why did Carl Jung say many people walk in shoes that are too small for them? Because I can, like, okay, one can, you know, there's a superstition, isn't there? You know, it comes from maybe from Greece, is that, you know, pride comes before a fall, you know, hubris, that they're shocking things. Inflation, that's a disgusting thing to have, inflation, but I sometimes get inflated after a cup of coffee. But it's kind of like, so there's that side of it. But then it seems to me there's a reverse narcissism or something, which is, you know, sometimes where people own their largeness, there can be something very good about it. Whereas there's often this tendency to, what is it, to not own it at all.
To play life too small.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people do that. I do think there also is a space of, and this is in the myth of Narcissus, there's a certain envy as well of somebody who is large and who is, I mean, you mentioned Hillman, he might be an example as well of people who might have, I'm just wondering, envious of the, I mean, there's lots of current people as well, besides Hillman, who in many fields, who really know how to just, they've got an idea, they have something, they know they've got something to do, they will follow it. And other people will say, oh, you're being too much. No, that person is being all that they need to be. If we say they're too much, does that mean that we are playing life too small? And is that narcissistic place that's kind of needed, if you think about it, to get out of bed and go into the world? If we're not using it, then we're really depriving ourselves. It's just to use it wisely. I do think there is a danger of living in life with too small of shoes, because if you think about it, your basic stance is pinched. You don't feel comfortable. Life is not flowing or easy. And yet, if you're going to live beyond whatever the average is, you're going to get a certain amount of envy, rivalry. You shouldn't, how about this? Act your age. So I'm wondering about the person that was talking to you, and you could feel that place of whatever age means. Was there an implication of you shouldn't be doing it at this age? You should be.
No, I think it was more that I looked like someone who was quite a bit older than me.
Oh, that was their projection. But you know, I wonder if the projection was also one of perhaps wisdom, something to offer. Old in the sense of having been around, having acquired a certain amount of knowledge. Yes,
That's a nice way to put it.
yeah, and being a recognition of being how you can put that out to other people through having lived, Yes.
Yeah, there's a guy in Western Australia. He's one of our media tycoons, and he's incredible. I always think he's got an incredibly craggy face. You know, like when they talk about that, but he's got triple what most people have. But in him, I see there's something in that. It's like etched. There's something etched into that face, you know, which is quite. I find it quite attractive in
Yes,
the way that
exactly.
looks.
Yes, it's intriguing, but I think what we do is we project onto that person a certain knowledge acquired. The face represents a certain depth that we would be projecting into that person's face. They probably carry it as well, though. A certain something that's valuable, but also, is that person living really their depth? Maybe they are. Maybe that's what we're really seeing, is they're living their, you could say, their narcissism. Are they living it? If you live it, it's okay.
If you live it, it's okay. Narcissism. What
Well,
does that mean?
in a related way, if you are living all of yourself and you are your firm self in this and have broken through the narcissistic defenses, you know, I'm too vulnerable, I'm scared, I'm this, I'm that, then you can take that energy, because Narcissus was young. You can take the energy and use it if you can learn to relate with it. If you,
It's kind of like, you know, perhaps there's that stage in youth where there's an incredible, well, I can relate to this anyway, where there's you know, when Jung says you can only go as far with another as what you've gone with yourself in a way.
yes,
And when there's that defense, you know, maybe 16, 17, 18, I think maybe this happens with boys, you know, if you're playing sport and you've got that armor and, you know, this thing of male strength or whatever, but there's a feeling inferiority in terms of being able to, in the related functions outside of oneself, that sometimes goes hand in hand with that.
really. So let me ask you, do you think that also applies to females who are into sport? Because I'm wondering, and I wonder if part of the difference is not male, female, but how we get raised, the family we're in, the culture we are in, who encourages who to relate as well as do sport. Because sport is an interesting thing. You've got to have a certain, I'm going for it in
Well,
sport.
I think the competitive, the competitive nature of it.
Yes, exactly. But it lives in a lot of people, no matter who they are. But you've got to have that part that says, I'm going to compete because I know, because I need to. It's not necessarily to kill off the other. It's because this is me and I am doing my best. Yeah, it's really living according to the best of oneself. The question about narcissism is if people get caught in it in a negative way,
Mm.
are they really living their best self?
Mm.
Sometimes not. I think it depends on the person.
So why did you start writing about it?
Pardon me?
Why did you start writing about narcissism?
Oh, because I think it is an intriguing part of the personality. And I think the more we recognize who we are and how we are narcissistic, the bigger challenge it presents because of what you said. People label narcissists in a very negative way. And I think that there is something to understand about narcissism. And people that I've worked with also who self-label as narcissists, it has evolved. They're very competent in whatever, quite excellent, don't realize it, and have, in a way, not lived the narcissism to the full. It has become isolative rather than living life fully. So I've seen it in my work quite a bit, where
You know,
people will check themselves.
You know, one thing James Hollis says is about, are you serving something like that? This is what I like. Like, you know, because if I know this is a little bit inarticulate in the sense of, you know, you could take Jesus or the Buddha or someone, right, and you could say, geez, they are a bit of a narcissist because, you know, they've gone out and spread the light or whatever. But it seems that such a big part of that is someone in service of something, of the divine, of the sacred, of something larger than themselves. Because if there is a mystery much larger than ourselves, it gives a perspective that is somehow seems healthier or whatever.
Yes, but you see, you said, so the one or the narcissist, whoever that is, takes themselves out to the world. There's the value.
Mm.
So the competency, the capabilities, the qualities are taken out to the world in a way of relating with the world. So whatever it is that propels that in someone, they don't just hold it inside.
And it
That's
seems to
what
be very important to get it out as well for the individual. It seems to be, it's like, well, who was it? St. Thomas, that if you bring from what is within inside of you and bring it out, you will be saved or whatever.
Totally. If you keep it, the parable of keeping your talents under the bushel, it's really against life. You're supposed to take the talents, this is what you're saying, that bushel of the talents, use your talents in a related way out in the world. So it's really a shame if you just hold them inside. In a sense, in the mythology of Narcissus, he didn't take them out to the world.
Right.
Right? He held it all inside. He drowned in the pond looking at himself. Nothing else was ever noticed. So there's the death part. But the life part is, if you can bring it out to the world, then you've really done yourself. And maybe that's the meaning and purpose of
that you were talking about at the beginning.
Yes, but that might be the meaning and purpose of narcissism as well, is to recognize what has been held singularly inside and how it can be shared out in the world. And I think our world kind of needs that now.
So, can you just talk for a little while? Like, I know, you know, maybe we're getting close in one way, Susan, but could you say something about the world situation and how this can you expand upon that a little? in terms of our political situation, cultural situation?
Well, I think that when large things happen, if the in my work, when people don't talk about it at all, I will bring it up, because I think the psyche is not just a singular psyche. It is a connected psyche. And so I will bring up, have you noticed, or how are you affected by, or what does it make you feel like, or what are you doing? What are you doing because of how you feel? So I think there's a certain, you can't just sit on the couch and that be all of your life. It would be against meaning. Yeah, it's like honor that you're on the couch, you're looking at yourself, but you're also using yourself in as constructive a way that you can. So I think it's important to
And
bring it.
is there a theme? Could I go that far? Is there a theme in the kinds of things that people are saying? I think we might have been talking about this just before we started, in a way.
We did. Well, I mentioned, because I live in the United States, a certain amount of fear. You mentioned the divisiveness, tribal nature, of the culture. And how does that affect the person? And are they aware of it? So if you're living in the world, you're not aware of a certain amount of fear, bombs falling, people starving. Wait a second, you're way too enclosed inside. How can you use that to honor what's going on inside of you and again relate outside? Again, I think this is the beauty of analytical depth work. It's not just solve your own problem. It is your problem also is related out in the world.
But then, someone you could ask them that question. They've come along to you to do some therapy, and then they go, oh, I better become more active. I'll go to the conference that the Jung Society in San Francisco are running, and which is a bit democratic party style. So then they're going to take one side, aren't they?
Well, not necessarily, because my question would be to them, well, how did you feel about it? How do you take in the information? Do you agree with everything that is said? And if you agree, how come you're going to agree with everything?
Well, they tend to fall into it, though. And then they say, you better use your pronouns in the right way all the time and be careful. So what happens is people just go headlong, and then they become very boring because it becomes like political propaganda.
Exactly, which means that people are not thinking or evaluating or reflecting. So if you are reflective, if you learn how to honor what all sides, which is so difficult to do, then you don't just take something hook, line, and sinker. It would be like believing every single thing that Jung said. It's like, wait a second, you're following some party line? That is uncreative. The creative is taking what you agree with or what you feel like, look at the other as challenges, and kind of chew on the information. Don't just swallow it.
It's kind of like, when Jung said there should be, a dialogue between the conscious and the unconscious. But that whole word of dialogue, maybe it's a bit old-fashioned, like I'm not sure how much people really believe in the dialogue between the parts, but it's kind of like, I could take that out from a psychological principle, the dialogue between.
Yes.
And the dialogue out to believe in that dialogue between the parts, or to have faith in it, or
I think so, but I also think the dialogue is in the active imagination. Jung's idea of active imagination. That's dialogue, conscious and unconscious. Dialogue also is, no matter where you go or what you read or what conference you attend, are you doing it in a dialogue way? Or are you just taking in information in total belief? Or are you being evaluative and dialogue back and forth? There's the challenge, dialogue. It's also the dynamism in the dialogue as well. It gives life.
And somewhere in this is like when you've got two opposites, you know, like if you've got the puer and the senex, they can be seen as opposites. But somehow that third thing is a strange combination between both, perhaps. And it's that strange combination that we're kind of after, isn't it?
I think it totally is. I think it is how we can use all these different parts of ourselves in our own creative way, but not just keeping it inside, bringing it out. I mean, you can bring it out in a million different ways.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you can write, you can sing, you can garden, you can cook, you can, right? Cook, exactly. All kinds of ways of taking the preciousness of oneself, recognizing that it's precious, and bringing your specialness out into the world.
And just finally, just talk about creativity. I mean, that's what you were just talking about there, but you know, you write a lot and you write books and maybe and in other ways, but what just talk about it for a couple of minutes. What do you think about creativity?
Well, I think if we're not using our creativity, we're living dead. So creativity comes in so many different forms. And how can we be creative with our creativity and encourage it also? So that creativity means being your unusual self and finding what is unusual in you and your own particular slant on it and living it. So I think it's an essential part of life. People who are stopping their creativity, let's put it that way, I think are dead inside. And I think they know it. And so they're compensating through addictions, all kinds of things, complexes that take them away from being their total selves. So the creative aspect, which actually is emphasized in analytical work, is so important. I don't know that it's analyzed or promoted in a classical psychological dry way of symptomatic problems. It comes from the symptoms. The problem is the other side of the creative.
I think Hillman said once that, you know, from his understanding, no one has emphasized creativity as much as Jung or brought forth a creative psychology, and that there is this instinct of the creative instinct that needs to be fulfilled or satisfied.
Exactly.
Or whatever. Yeah.
Exactly. I think we all have it in different ways. And I think that we need to access it because it means life. So as long as we're alive, we might as well do it.
We might as well. Well, maybe that's a good place to finish. Thank you very much. And a lot to chew over there and have a dialogue with in terms of what you've said.
Yes, and in terms of what you've said as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan.